Okay, ready to go. So good morning, everybody. Al Ebry from Momentum, and this webinar is taking you through a number of reporting options, particularly from a management reporting perspective in MYOB Exo, and the areas we're going to cover, some of them briefly and some of them in reasonable detail, is the general ledger trial balance tree, dashboarding features within MYOB Exo. In particular, we'll spend some time on the general ledger report designer, and that's where you can set up and update, modify your own profit and loss balance sheet type reports. Then we'll spend some time looking at sales analysis designer, which is really the sales and gross margin reporting engine, particularly good for businesses in wholesale. We'll touch on clarity reports and also reporting into Excel. And then we'll also discuss a couple of distribution options as far as how people can receive reports either remotely or automatically. So just working in our demonstration system, and our webinar this time we're using the latest version of MYOB Exo, which is 2017.1. That release came out a couple of weeks ago and collated a whole bunch of new features brought forward from the releases last year, as well as some extra things, in particular menu favorites, which is basically an automatically generated list of areas of the system, including reports, that you access regularly. So whatever you click on as you're working away in MYOB Exo, it will remember that, and it will show you what you've accessed recently, what you access most commonly in order, and also the reports you run most commonly. So, you know, over a week or two of use, that would remember the most common things you do and potentially make it easier for you to go and re-access those things by using the favorites option. Okay, so from a reporting perspective, reporting can be used for disseminating information in the organization, but a lot of cases it's used to check information before you produce final management reports. And a good way of doing that in Exo, particularly from a trial balance, profit and loss balance sheet perspective, is using the trial balance tree. Some people don't realize it's there or how useful it is. One of the things that's reason it is particularly useful is it's completely drillable. And it's quite flexible as to what information it does or doesn't show. So the trial balance tree is basically showing the values in your general ledger grouped by the account groups that would have been configured for you. By default, it uses the current account balances as at right now, but it can be changed to say year-to-date July or year-to-date June, and it will automatically update, or you can take a range of any periods and they can span a financial year, doesn't matter. So we can say June to July. In doing that, as soon as you start changing these options, you get the ability to filter branches as well. So we can say all branches or any of the individual branches that you might have set up in your system. And typically you might want to hide zero balances, and it hides inactive accounts by default. Having brought up those totals, anything that you then want to investigate, if something looks high or low, then you can expand that account group, expand that account. That would then show the values for each sub-account within that account if they existed. And if you click on that, it basically drills into that account with the date range that you've selected pass through to this screen. and if we'd filtered on a branch, that would be passed through to this screen. So now you can actually look at individual transactions. So commonly we use this, and our customers use this just to do a pre-check of the profit and loss balance sheet, pick up any anomalies that might look incorrect, investigate the transaction, so you can drill into the batch, the account that the transaction came from, which would take you to the debtor or creditor it relates to, or drill straight into the transaction. So the tree can be used for, as an example, profit and loss only. Let's say year-to-date June, so last year full year. Balance sheet only, which will only pick up your balance sheet accounts, or the whole trial balance. You can expand all, which will give you the exploded view of every account, account group, account, sub-account for the selection that you've made. And that can, of course, still be filtered by branch. And you can also collapse that view. You can copy to the clipboard. So if you expand all, copy to clipboard, and you can paste to Excel. So bring up my spreadsheet. Paste. Set my column settings. So we'd suggest that the tree is a really good tool for just checking the general ledger, trial balance, P&L balance sheet as a pre-check before you start, creating and printing and sending out final versions of those reports to your business team. So trial balance tree is on the General Ledger tab, in the middle, at the bottom. We've mentioned in a number of previous webinars that Exo has a very strong dashboarding feature. It's quite underutilized. It presents itself in a number of ways. Some of the screens that you might look at in Exo are in fact dashboards. So when you log in, usually the default view is the task scheduler, and the recent items list, for example, is a dashboard. On any screen, even if it's a normal Exo screen like this, you can actually add dashboards. So there's a little plus sign that shows that says Add Widgets. And clicking that will give you a list of widgets, which may or may not look like mine. There are standard widgets that MYOB provide, and those standard widgets are quite good, and depending on what the widget is, may only be available in some modules. So for example, a widget relating to jobs near completion might only be available by default in the job costing module, but you can update the security around those and make them available in any module, and also control what users or what roles can access them. So a nice way of using dashboards for quick snapshot information is to use that feature, add the widget, and you can see what I've done here is at the very bottom of my screen, I've got tabs. So I've got my debtor's age trial balance as a widget that automatically refreshes. So at any point I can just go to that screen. If need be, I can sort it by overdue balance. Double-click any record, view the actual debtor account, look at any transactions. I might leave notes relating to that debtor and make a phone call or do something about following up their overdue account, and then you can save and drill back out and go on to the next one. So you can have widgets for any purpose, and they can be positioned on screens that are relevant to you. This one's overdue sales orders. And the way you move them around is you click and drag the purple heading banner for that widget. As soon as you start doing it, you'll see these yellow arrows in the middle of my screen. And what there is, when you put your mouse over them, it's then going to show you where is that widget going to be placed. So left is on the left half of the screen, right is on the right half, bottom is on the bottom half, top's on the top half. Middle is basically over the top, which basically creates a tab down the bottom. I quite like using that because it gives me a full screen view of each widget. Widgets are quite easy to create. A simple grid widget like this is actually just an SQL query that one of our consultants has written in a fairly short period of time. So if you have any people that can write basic SQL queries, you can create your own widgets. But if you have a clear idea of what information is in your widget, equally we can create those for you, and they're not very time consuming for us to do, and therefore a much lower cost than designing a graphical report. Exo's dashboard module, which is called Analytics, is also available, and it really is just a collection of widgets or dashboards organized logically. So both options are available. So Exo Analytics comes standard with your Exo system. There's no additional costs. Some of our customers use it heavily. Some perhaps haven't taken the time to look. It allows you to set up years for your financial years and months for each financial year, and then a budget for each month. And in doing that, then automatically the main tab that comes up will show you sales and GP for the period, for the year, versus budget. It's not intended to replace your full general ledger budget. It's really a sales budget. And you can see the rest of the dashboards, depending on what you do or don't want to see, is really just a collation of what's available and organized in the screen in different ways. So I like to have two halves of the screen rather than try to squeeze too many things into a small space. So for example, I could do that, and that's not too bad if you've got a big monitor, but on smaller monitors, as soon as you start I guess dividing the screen up into two smaller chunks, it's just a little bit more scrolling, but it's really personal preference. The graphical widgets, which show charts like this, are also drillable. So Analytics has a sales tab, an invoice listing tab, which is actually a really good way of checking margin. So if we were to look at sales in June, it shows all the invoices for that month. You can filter it by the salesperson, and it shows you cost, value, markup, margin, and anything that's particularly high or low, you can actually drill into that invoice. And so what was going on with that one? It's a way of just monitoring what's happening. You have an orders list, similar to the invoice list, but for sales orders. A stock tab, stock on hand in each warehouse with a stock turn, and various others. Finance, which is mostly around debtors, creditors, so aged payables, aged receivables, as either a pie chart or a grid. You can actually change charts on the fly if it makes sense to do so. And there's a purchases tab. So for example, top 10 suppliers by margin, top 10 suppliers by purchases, probably more relevant. In addition to these tabs, there are 2 hidden tabs, and these are custom tabs that can be turned on given a particular name. For example, I've created one called my Jobs tab, where I've got some widgets relating to jobs, and the General Ledger tab, where I've got a I guess a mini profit and loss by month as a pivot, which allows me to do similar to what the tree does and drill into specific information down to transactional level. So analytics can be a solution that you can deploy, for example, just to people that are managers that don't even necessarily log into Exo all that often, because it actually has its own icon that can be put on the desktop and log on to that. Nextly, I want to talk about the General Ledger Report Writer, which is a topic of interest commonly. So how can we create, update, improve the management reports relating to profit and loss balance sheet is a common question. So let's just have a look at how all that works. Firstly, where do you run them from once they're created? 2 places. So the end of month menu, graphical tab, month-end reports, run General Ledger reports. Drop-down menu, reports, General Ledger reports, run General Ledger reports. You can run reports one after the other as a batch. So if, for example, at the end of each month, you've got lots of different branches or divisions in your business and you need to produce a P&L for each one, you can actually take those reports and using the batch engine, you can add them in here to run one after the other, export to PDF, and the first one might be for branch 1, the second for branch 2, the third one for branch 3, etc. And then you can run them basically sequentially one after the other. How do you set them up? So in the Reports tab, there's a General Ledger Report Designer. Okay, so we're going to focus on a profit and loss, and we'll also look at a balance sheet, how to do a budget comparison, and we'll also spend a bit of time at looking at how you add ratios in, which is something that's improved quite a lot of recent times. So creating a report, it'd be rare that you didn't already have some reports set up. That's normally something we do as part of the implementation or provide training for the client to do. So the report has a name. You can have it show certain information at the top. You can have it format a particular way, for example, decimal places, commas as in thousands. Is it portrait or landscape, etc. That's the simple part. Then you have the structure. So we've got report rows and report columns. So the report rows, you usually only have to do once for a profit, loss, or balance sheet, because after that you can copy the report and it will copy that structure. And the way these rows work is you're setting out the layout of the report as it's going to appear down the left-hand side. So you have options of putting these different elements in as rows. So there are rows that can be used as headings, a main heading or a subheading, or a narrative or a page break. In this example, it's a main heading. Then my second row is a subheading, telling the report and displaying on the report that this is the income or revenue or sales section. Then to display the data that's relevant to that section, we normally use account groups. And account groups is exactly the same concept as what we saw in the general ledger tree. You have the option of a single account group, but the most common ones is a single account group or a range of account groups. So I'll show a single account group. It's basically saying, okay, what data do we want to put in this section of the report? We want the information relating to any account that's defined as an income account. So that's why that's showing there. And just to make sure that that's clear to everybody, I'll just minimize that screen and we'll go into the chart of accounts. And look at that exact same general ledger tree. So I actually have two accounts that are both considered income. And that's determined by the link between the account and its account group. So when you're looking at your general ledger tree, looking at your chart, looking at a report, if something is appearing, looks like it's appearing in the wrong place, it's probably because either the account is linked to an incorrect account group or the account group is put in the wrong part of the report. All right, so I'll go back to my report and carry on my design. Each section, if you want a subtotal, then the next thing you do is add a profit and loss subtotal function. So working your way through the list, you've got headings, you've got selections of data, and you've got totals, and they're fairly self-evident what they're used for. You've got profit and loss subtotals, totals, and grand total. Grand total, as you'd imagine, is for your net profit at the bottom. Total is used for totals for whole sections. So, for example, the total of expenses and expenses are broken up into multiple account groups. So we've got a profit and loss subtotal. We give it a little title so that when on the report it shows total income. Income is expressed as a credit, and we're resetting it so that the next total ignores it. And then you're really repeating that sequence right down the report. So cost of sales is a subheading. The data in the cost of sales section is an account group, being the cost of sales account group. The subtotal for cost of goods is a subtotal. When we get to gross profit, that's a total, not a subtotal. So we're saying profit and loss total, gross profit. What that is telling the report is basically add up everything above me and then reset it. Then we've got expenses as a subheading, and our expenses are broken down into multiple sections. Admin costs, subheading, the data for the admin costs based on the account group, total admin costs. So I won't go any further with the rows. You should get the idea. That's the simplest way to do it. If I wanted to do a simple P&L report that instead of breaking all of my expenses down into their individual account groups, I just basically added those all up, then in that case, I would have, instead of a single account group for admin costs, I would say I'm going to have a sequential range of account groups from admin down to employment costs. And that would mean I could have a version of my P&L without all this detail in it that just gave me the total expenses only rather than the breakdown. EBIT at the bottom. So let's look at total expenses. That's a profit and loss total function. So again, that's just basically adding everything above it up as far as the last total, which was gross profit. And then EBIT is a grand total, which is basically everything above it. Therefore, it's income, less cost of sales, less expenses. Net profit is another grand total. The column side of things relates to the columns you're going to have across the page. So you're always going to list the account code and or the account name. Some people don't bother showing the account number. And you have options as to what information you're going to show in each column. So period basically means the value of this data for the period of time, usually accounting period, usually month, that the report has been selected for when it's run. The other options you can add in is a value for this year, a value for last year, a value for last year for the full year, and various options around budget, year-to-date budget, full-year budget, quarter totals, percentages. And that's the stuff that's more useful to start to play around with. So I'm going to change this one. We've got a ratio in this report. I'm going to show you a different one. So I'm going to say this year, and I'll update that column. So whatever changes you make, you click this button here, Generate GL Report Table, and then Save and Exit. Then I'm going to run that report. When you run the report, you can choose these options, and these options can be set by default. Normally, you don't want to see rows on the report if there's no, no revenue or expense for that account. You may or may not want to show each individual sub-account, so this option gives you the ability to collapse or expand the sub-accounts, and use the Clarity formatting template. Basically overlays the report with a more nicely formatted Clarity version. So you can see how the structure we've created in the report is then presented. So we've got our account groups, which are also headings. We've got the data for any account, sub-account within that account group, and we've got a subtotal for each one. And because I added year-to-date, I've got a year-to-date figure as well as a month-to-date figure. I've run it for July, so the values are the same. If I go back to June, then I've got June month, full year to date, year ended 30 June. So what we do is once we've created one that we're happy with, then usually most other things are a variation on that, particularly in terms of what the rows are doing. That usually doesn't change, but you might want to have different versions with different information as columns. So you can easily take an existing report and copy it, and then make whatever changes you like. So that's what we have done, for example, with a profit and loss by branch. Let me just check that one. So a lot of times we like to and our customers that have multiple branches, be they departments, divisions, what have you. Presented as columns across the page. So what we would have done is take this report, copy it, come in and rename it so we know what it is. Probably change it to a landscape depending on how many columns we're going to have. And then not touch this section. In this section, we're still going to leave this as the period, but we only want it to show the value for branch 1. And then we want another column for branch 2. So this is how you achieve a side-by-side comparison of different divisions or locations in your business from a profit and loss perspective. You basically just add those columns, save that report, and let's run that one. Okay, so we've got exactly the same structure of the report we had before because that hasn't changed. Income, cost of sales, admin, expenses broken down into categories. But what we've done is we've separated into columns the value for each individual branch set up, provided a total for the whole company, which is basically the total of these, and also a total year-to-date figure. It's possible, if you did a landscape version of this report, to have branch 1 budget with a variance, branch 2 budget with a variance, etc. So if you're using the budgeting feature, you can do all that kind of stuff. If we look at doing a budget comparison, P&L versus budget. Again, we take a copy of the original P&L report because the structure isn't going to change. The only thing that's going to change is what we show. So this one is I should rename this report. It's a year-to-date. So all we're doing is we've replaced the period value with the value for this year. We've added a column to say what's the year-to-date budget. And the report automatically, without you putting anything here at all, will then express that as a variance. I've put in percentage of sales as a ratio as well, but I might just remove that. And I'll show you another report shortly that has ratios. Year-to-date P&L versus budget. At June, you need to select the budget that you're comparing to. So normally you'd be comparing to your June 17 budget if you're running June 17. I don't have one, so I'm just going to pick 2018. So there's a budget set up. This assumes that you have set a budget up in the system with a value for each account for each month. And we covered that in a webinar not too long ago. So now you've got year-to-date value, what the year-to-date budget is, and your variance against that, which Exo automatically adds that column. You have the choice to express that variance as a percentage instead of dollars, and you do that just by ticking this option on the report. All right, so just look at that example, and you can see just by following the steps that I'm doing in that setup screen that it's easy to, I could create a copy of this report, and I could have a current month with a current month budget, a year-to-date with a year-to-date budget, all in the one report. You'd probably landscape it in that case. So you can see I've got a fairly low budget, so my variance is looking a bit silly, but the calculation's correct.
How much call for it, Dan?
And also now what I'm going to show is a couple of newer things that people don't do a lot, but they're now a lot easier to do, relating to ratios. So I've got a P&L, same structure, and in my report I want to show each of the things in the report as a percentage of the total that the section may relate to. So I've got the value for the period, and there's a feature that you can choose to say, I want to show a percentage. You're going to say what that's called. I'm just going to call it percentage of total. And then depending on what you want that percentage to do, you can choose some values over here. So the range, the percent range row sequence and percent range row, percent row sequence is what rows in the report are we showing this percentage against? So we've said 25 to 35. So the income data and income total. And the column sequence is what column of data are we doing the calculation on? Okay, so the value for the period is column 30, so I'm putting in column 30. And then the column destination is which column do we want this calculation or this percentage to show in. So I'm going to leave this, the first one you add in, you leave that blank or make it 0. So this first one does a calculation of and shows each sales account as a percentage of the total sales. Then I want to show each cost of sale account as a percentage of the total cost of sale. So I've done the same sort of thing. It's a percentage from row 55 to 65, calculating on column 30, which is the value for the period. And the column destination, what this is saying is I want this percentage not to show in a separate column. I want it to show in the same column as the first one. So I've said the first percentage we created was column 70, so I put this in the same column. And then I've basically done the same through the balance of the report. So admin, so each admin expense as a percentage of the total admin expenses, so 105 to 115, calculating on the period value, which is column 30, and displaying it in the same column as the first one, which is column 70. What that does is give me what I've asked, a P&L with the value for the month that I selected only. I could have done year-to-date and made my calculation on the year-to-date figure, so I could have both. And then it's showing the value in each account expressed as a percentage of its total for that section. So same with cost of goods, each value expressed as a total of its section, admin costs, etc. So you can use that tool or that percentage calculation to express things as a percentage of sales or as a percentage of the section it relates to. Doing a balance sheet report is exactly the same as doing a P&L report, and if you have different versions of the balance sheet report, for example, a 12-month balance sheet as well as a current balance sheet, you do the same exercise once, setting the structure of your rows. Normally you're going to have current assets, non-current assets, current liabilities, so total assets. Then I've got current liabilities broken up into sections, non-current liabilities, equity. So those are all using the same concepts as what we had in the P&L report. For example, subheading, account group, balance sheet subtotal, so there are balance sheet subtotals versus profit and loss subtotals. Total liabilities is a balance sheet total function as opposed to a profit and loss total function, but pretty self-evident how to use that. And then your total equity is a subtotal just of the equity section. The net assets is a grand total, which is obviously assets less liabilities. That should equal the equity section. What you then show, if you want to show this year, last year, spread it into 12 months, is just the product of the columns that you add. Okay, so that's my balance sheet broken into the account groups or categories that have been set up in the system. So current assets broken up into cash accounts, other current assets, non-current assets broken up into land and buildings, other non-current assets, current liabilities, non-current liabilities, etc. Pretty straightforward once you understand the plumbing. In having a bit of a dash at doing reports, we would always suggest that you copy a report that works and then don't change that one just in case you break it. Because if you break the one you've copied, you can delete it and recopy the original one and keep going. So it just saves you having to get us to reconstruct the report for you if the original one that works is somehow broken. Alrighty, so that's a fair bit of detail on the General Ledger Report Designer, but that's, we get a lot of requests for that, so I thought I would sort of drill into that quite a bit for you. I just want to move on to next section, so Sales Analysis Designer, Clarity, and Excel. Sales Analysis Designer is all about sales and margin from a sales ledger perspective, not a general ledger perspective. The GL report writer is looking at data coming directly from the general ledger. The sales analysis report writer is looking at things from the sales invoice data, whether that data has been posted to the general ledger or not. So I'd just like to be clear about that. And what this is really a powerful tool for is wholesale businesses that are looking to get sales and margin by customer, by sales rep, by state, by account group, by stock group, all kinds of options like that. So you have about 8 different report types. Let's look at an example of a date range report. And then you can choose the dates or choose a predefined range, we'll say last month. The right-hand side is where the real ability to slice and dice the report different ways comes to fore. So let's say we want to see sales by customer. And some of these names take a little bit of getting used to, but if you normally read the notes part, it's self-evident. So you've got, these are the most commonly used options. If we look at all, there are many, many different ways that you can slice and dice this report. Account name keyed is debtor or customer. Then you've got account group, account primary group name, and account secondary group name. That relates to groupings you can put against customers or debtors, and they're commonly used for all kinds of things, what industry that customer's in, whether they're an A or a B customer, what state they're in. Different businesses use them different ways. Then you've got account name branch. That relates to if you're using parent-child debtors and you want to break things out at the child level. Branch name, so this relates to your general ledger branches, whether they be divisions or locations. Locations is your actual stock or warehouse locations. And then you've got data relating to the items or stock items that are on the invoices you're going to be reporting on. So individual product or stock group or secondary stock group. So those are commonly used to differentiate products by category. And then you've got salesperson or sales rep. So let's do one example. We want sales by customer for June, which is what it'll give you. Because I had show gross profit ticked, I've got the total quantity, value, cost, GP dollars, GP percent. If I add to that product, now I'll have sales by customer by product. So each debtor, any item they purchased in that period of time, total quantity, sales, cost, value, gross profit. If I didn't want it by customer, but I want it by product group and then product within group, then I would do it that way. So now I've got my different product groups or categories and what I've sold in each category, quantity, value, markup, margin, total for each stock group or category. And then the other way you could flip it would be sales rep. So salesperson by product. Or salesperson by customer. Okay, so you can see how easy it is to do different flavors of the same data, and these are commonly the main ways, particularly wholesale businesses like to look at their reporting. And you've got options instead of just one date. We can say, we want 12-month sales. So sales rep, each customer they've sold to, and what their values are by month for a rolling 12 months. If I wanted to show that just for one salesperson or one customer, then I can come down here and add a filter and say sales staff equals Greg. Add that into the middle, so the selection criteria in the middle applies a filter to whatever you've selected above. So now I get a one-page report just for Greg. So this reporting tool is super flexible for getting different variations of sales margin for almost any combination of customer, salesperson, product, branch you could think of. When you create reports you like, you can save them. So I can save as, and it brings up a folder where you're going to save things to. In Exo, all the reports get saved in a folder called Clarity, under which there are two folders, Custom Reports and Master Reports. So anything you save, whether it's a Clarity report or a Sales Analysis report, put it in the Custom Reports folder and then call it whatever you want. Greg M. 12-month sales. So that way, next time I come back to Sales Analysis, rather than go, I've got to remember what I did, I can just go Open, Clarity, Custom, Greg 12-month sales, run. Alrighty, so those are the main options of producing reports. I touched on the ability to schedule reports, or, well, not really schedule, but to run general ledger reports one after the other using a batch. So in that tool, you can say, as defined in the batch. Let me look at this one. So you create a batch, and then in that batch, you add one or more reports that you're going to run one after the other. So you can basically say, right, first run that report, run it for July for branches 2 and 3. Then run this report, run it for July, run it for all branches, all sub-accounts, and save it to a file. And then you can add another one and keep going. When you run that batch, that's what it'll do. Separate to that, Momentum has a tool called our Report Scheduler. So it can be used to schedule Clarity reports at this point only. So Clarity reports do make up probably 90% of their available reports in the system. And this enables you to select reports to run similar to the batch of a GL report, but this will actually allow you to choose what reports, output them to PDF, and email them to selected recipients every Monday morning at 9 o'clock, for example. And the other option for disseminating reports would be Exo on the go. So let me just show you an example of that. You can have a look at this on your Exo Education Center. So Exo on the Go is Exo's iPad app that was originally developed with more with sales reps in mind, but it can equally be used as a management tool. So anybody who has access to Exo on the Go can log into it, look at various things, including companies, customers, orders, products, and the sort of sales person type stuff. But it also has a reports option. So any report that is a Clarity report can be made available as an Exo on the Go report. And what that'll do is the user can run the report from their device, their iPad device. It will talk back to the server, run the report, PDF it, and send it to them on their notification on their device. So you can very easily run a report. It takes roughly the same amount of time it takes to run the report on the server. So you can have reports available by menu, very similar to Exo. Choose the report you want to run, what date, etc. you want to run it for, and it will return that report straight back to your device. Okay, so those are the key things that we were covering today. So the trial balance tree, dashboards, analytics. We spent most of our time looking at general ledger reports, P&Ls, balance sheets, budgets, comparisons. So hopefully that's given you a good idea how you can have a bit of a dash at that yourselves. Same with Sales Analysis Designer. Clarity I've only touched on very briefly, but most other reports in the system are using Clarity, and Clarity can be used to create virtually any report about anything. All reports in later versions export quite nicely to Excel these days. And in terms of report distribution, you've got your GL batch, you have your Momentum report scheduler if that's of interest, and you can actually run reports on the iPad device. So that's our content covered for this fortnight. Hopefully you found that informative. I invite any questions, so if you have any, fire away, press #6 if you had muted your phone. Otherwise I'll stay on the line for a minute or two. And if I don't hear from you, I look forward to talking to you again at our next webinar. Thank you.